This is the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast, where we interview conservationists, hunters, anglers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the greatest stories, information, and advice from the best in the world. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, I'm going to go over some of the books that I read this summer that really helped me catch more fish and target more species-specific fish, and they can really help you too. One of my favorite things about these books is they are not expensive. They're actually pretty old books, and like I've said a ton of times on this podcast, I feel like the old school books help me the most because they're not so reliant on having fish finders and all the new technology that we have nowadays. So for me, as someone who's really diving down the fishing rabbit hole, they're much more beneficial to build that base knowledge. Than when I have those tools and use those tools while I'm out, I'm able to use them more effectively because I understand like the basic principles of how to catch fish rather than relying on that technology. So first up, I'm going to start. I read this book early in the season, right in midwinter, essentially, it came out about Pike. It is Pike, an In-Fisherman Handbook of Strategies, and it is pretty old. Let's take a look here in the cover to see what we're talking about. This book was first printed in 1983. Was not born yet. So good information. Some of the takeaways from this book that really helped me catch pike was to understand that they are more of a cold water fish. Doesn't mean you can't catch them in warm water. I did catch them in warmer water in the summer on crankbaits. Just their lifestyles are more based around that colder water. So actually, when it's frozen and right towards the end of the freezing is the time to catch the big hogs. And, you know, this information can be updated, you know, nowadays. They've learned a lot about way more stuff since the 80s through genetics and just have more technology to monitor these fish, but building a good base. Found out that they kind of like shallow, weedy areas this times of the year when they're really inactive in the summer, which is not a good time to target the giants. Like I said, you can catch them, but they're usually the smaller little hammer handle guys that are attacking your lures. Super slimy fish, but this did up my success rate of catching pike, even when I wasn't targeting them. And something that I've learned across all species that I've been going after this year is that they make specific lures for specific species and this and that. But I mean, a pike's going to eat a bass lure. A bass is going to eat a bass lure. I've had panfish eat a bass lure, and the fish are attacking anything that they pretty much think that they can eat. So a lot of the tactics are interchangeable. It's just more so about where you're going to find the fish. And if you're into ice fishing for pike, which I've really been wanting to do a lot more, this is a great book, very inexpensive. I think I paid less than $5 for this book on Amazon. Used, there's tons of them available. They must have printed a ton of copies of these books. And it's just a really good base level. It's loaded with maps and information about their spawning cycle, even at the end here, how to fillet and eat them. And that is a running trend I've found in a lot of these older books too, is they're keeping the fish. Even the bass book, they're talking about keeping the fish, and it's just on the edge of these conservation-minded stuff when populations started to decline, and it's still people were eating them and keeping them fish. So a lot of the myths we perpetuate today about it's not good, they're not good to eat and all this stuff don't ring true for a lot of these fish. And these are all geared towards, you know, the fish I have here in the Midwest. I want to learn how to catch them, and they're great for understanding fish. You can catch them in any way, shape, or form. It's more about finding the fish than specific tactics, which the books do cover, but you can catch them on the fly just as well as you can on a crankbait or something. Just knowing where they're at is the most important part. So the pike one's really good. It's long. A lot of the In-Fisherman ones I'm going to go over have a lot of overlapping information about the seasons, and they talk about like different types of structure and different types of like phases of the moon, how those affect fish and stuff like that. And there's a lot of stuff about thermoclines and different types of lakes, you know, stuff along those lines are a lot of overlap. So once you read one of these older books from In-Fisherman specifically, you can almost kind of skip over that stuff. I don't, because I constantly need that refresher to kind of remember what it's all about, but you can overlap a lot of this information and it reinforces it and learns a lot, which is really good. So if you're into pike, I would recommend that one.
Wake up early before the sun comes up. Yeah. Then you drink a little coffee, fire the Gator Tail up, then you hit it on out where no man goes. Gator Tail flying.
The most recent one I finished was Advanced Bass Fishing. This is called Advanced Bass Fishing, Scientific Techniques for Catching Trophy-Sized Bass of All Species, a Breakthrough in Bass Angling by John Weiss. And this book is loaded with stuff I didn't know. Some of the coolest stuff that I found was bass aren't always in shallow water. That's just something that I took for granted my whole life, never considered it. And I might sound stupid for saying that, but most of the people I know consider bass shallow water fish. And they're talking in this book about how they mostly are in deep water. They get in big schools. They go into the deep water during certain areas of the day. That's why they're harder to catch. They talk about, migratory routes of bass throughout the day and finding different areas of structure that they follow, almost like a road map that's pretty predictable. And then they come up into the shallows to feed. And I didn't know any of that. So I have been studying the maps of the lakes that I fish, trying to find these areas. And I'm going out there in my kayak with my fish finder, trying to find little pockets of structure and areas that follow the maps. Like that they have example maps in the books that follow certain patterns of deep structure all the way up to shallow. There's certain things that bass are looking for on those routes. And I've been just going through maps that I made myself off of the internet because they don't exist for the lakes that I fish that I can find, and just trying to get an understanding of where these fish are going to be. And I've caught a lot more bass than I have in previous years through an extended period of time on the water and fishing. But the more I'm doing this and the more I'm going through these books and understanding how these fish operate, it's making it so much easier to find and catch them. Still get skunked every once in a while, but it's much easier. And, a lot of the stuff that we think about with fishing, we're always trying to go out when it's nice, calm, beautiful days. And this book is saying that that's pretty much the worst time to go fishing. You should go out there when the temperatures are the wind's out and it's super cloudy and crappy. That's when fish are going to be biting the most. And a lot of information about all species of bass in this book. They mostly are covering largemouth, which, it applies to everything, but a lot of these tactics are around reservoirs. There's a whole chapter on river fishing. There's a whole chapter on there's multiple chapters on the different types of reservoirs, natural lakes that are brand new, old Y fish were exploding. Huge bass were exploding in Toledo Bend right when they opened it, and why that has kind of died off over time. I mean, obviously there's still large bass in Toledo Bend and stuff out in Texas, but it just goes through all the ecology. It's amazing. I really love this book. These books are not the most exciting books in the world, but they're full of awesome information. It's a lot of dry stuff, and it really taught me the different reasons to use different rods and different trolling techniques and different types of lures for different presentations, different depths, different speeds, why there's so many types of lures, and it all starting to make more sense to me. Because if you're new to this, you walk into a Bass Pro and you're like, what the hell? There are thousands of lures to choose from, thousands of soft plastics, a million jigs. What are they all for? This book goes through the basics. And back when this book came out, there was not as many lures as there are today, I'm sure. And it talks about why that's important. And they talk about live bait a lot too, which is something that we don't normally think about when fishing for largemouth bass. It's always been, since I've been growing up, it's just part of marketing and consumerism and stuff, is everything's crankbaits and plastics and this and that, but they cover a lot of live bait techniques in here for all over the country, which it's really in depth and really awesome. And this book came out when fish finders were just starting to exist, and it talks about stuff like paper fish finders and all this. It's pretty cool. It's just a cool history almost of fishing, and it really has helped me catch more and better fish. So I would recommend that one. That's probably my favorite one of the summer, hands down.
Hey, what's up everyone? James Appleton here, co-founder of Absolute Aid. Welcome to the Seek to Do More program. This program will help you help yourself by developing the daily habits that will elevate your entire life. Over the next 30 days, you'll complete the doers list every single day. And the doers list includes 1, do something physical. 2, follow and stick to your diet of choice. 3, read a real book. 4, further your education on purpose. 5, dedicate time to your spiritual life. And 6, dedicate time to your hobbies. So if you're ready to take a structured, proven approach to build the daily habits that will allow you to get the most out of yourself, your time, and your life every single day, the Seek to Do More program is your blueprint. So make a choice, commit to yourself, sign up below, and let's get started.
Another one, which I'm just on the final few chapters here. It's kind of like summarizing stuff. You can still see, if you're watching this, my notes hanging out there. It's another In-Fisherman book, Smallmouth Bass, and In-Fisherman Handbook of Strategies. Again, another book I got on Amazon for nothing. I think this one was even cheaper than the Pike book, maybe like $3 to $5. And weirdly enough, I ordered a different book from them. It was called like Smallmouth Secrets or something, but they sent me this one instead, and I just read it anyways because I really don't care. Probably a lot of the same information, but again, this is going specifically over smallmouth. And one of the things that was interesting to me to learn about smallmouth is they're not necessarily a colder water fish. They prefer water temperatures that are slightly cooler than largemouth, but they can thrive in warm water. And that was surprising to me because they've always been told that they're a cold water fish. That's why they're from where I'm from, you know, the Great Lakes region, cooler water, and they do like current, which I've found, but they can survive in all conditions. They live in the Great Lakes. They get huge out in the Great Lakes. And this book has really opened my eyes, and it's helped me catch my first smallmouth bass. Smallmouth bass that I caught was because I was reading this book out in Lake Erie, and then I've caught a few in the river here, in the Maumee River, and it's directly correlated to me reading this book. I did an interview out on the river earlier this year with a guide, Nick Meinsinger, which you can go back and check that out if you want to. It was a great learning experience for me how to catch them on a fly rod, but the first smallmouth I ever caught were from reading this book and going out on my own and just figuring it out. And there's a lot of good information here. It talks about the different types of reservoirs that are good for smallmouth. It talks about even northern lakes up into Canada and why those are sometimes good for smallmouth, how to find them in the water column. And again, they're not just, always in the shallow waters. They're pretty adaptable, but also don't have big, according to this book, they don't have huge ranges. Like a largemouth bass will travel quite a bit throughout the day. Smallmouth bass appear to be more home-based. They stay within an area, and they're also schooling fish. You know, they kind of disperse throughout the season and come back together and things like that. So it's really interesting to learn the differences between smallmouth, largemouth specifically, because we have a lot of both of those up here. And it was really awesome to understand those differences and the different ways to catch them, which lures and stuff are all about the same. It's just where they're going to be in rivers and lakes. And I guess, if a largemouth bass population is dominant in a lake, the smallmouth bass aren't going to be as, they're going to be pushed out into the outer regions of their habitat, stuff like that. It's really an interesting book. Again, lots of dry, hard information, but really awesome if you're trying to catch bass. And again, cheap. I probably don't even have $20 in all these books together that I'm going to talk to you about today. And they're just so much good information that is not based on fish finders and things of that nature. And lastly here, I have this book, which actually still sells for a lot of money on Amazon. I think it's generally about $30. And I've had it on my wish list for years. And finally, I snagged a copy for $3 one day. Just somebody put it up as a used book. Totally good condition. It's literally called Panfish, the Freshwater Angler, the complete guide to catching sunfish, crappies, white bass, and yellow perch. Now, most of these fish are fairly easier to catch than the bass species. Lots of cool information. It's very summarized. It covers a lot of species of panfish, but it's really specific with, your sunfish, like your bluegill and your red ears and things of that nature. It differentiates those pictures or those species really well, and how you can actually target them a little bit more and find them in more specific places. And I really enjoyed this book overall because the pictures are so awesome in here. The photography in this book is amazing. It's a good coffee table book if you don't want to read it. And it's all really cool vintage. And it talks a lot about fly fishing in here. Fly fishing is a very effective way I've learned to catch bluegills and stuff like that. It's very awesome. But each fish, it goes over the tackle you can use, certain rod sizes, why those are important. It talks about all of that information and different hooks to use, different live bait to use, when to fish per times a year, and it's very condensed. It's almost like a quick read before you go out and fish to remind yourself. It's not a super detailed information. And for panfish, the technology hasn't really changed that much over the years. It's very much the same. You got top water poppers, you got worms on a hook, you got live bait. But again, the photography is astounding. Lots of underwater photography of these fish. Definitely has helped me differentiate between species, because to me, for 25, 30 years, all panfish were bluegill, essentially, all sunfish. That's just what we called them up where I grew up, and that's what I still call them occasionally. But the photography in here is awesome, and it really helps you identify them much easier. And it's, again, got great maps, great little indicators of where you can find them in a pinch, how to get them in deep water. And then, especially with white bass, I was surprised people eat white bass a lot up here. There's a big white bass run from the Great Lakes up where I live in Northwest Ohio. But a lot of people say they're gross. This book is arguing again that they're fine to eat, and a lot of people go after them. It's just a sign of how the times have changed. And these 4 books, I swear to you, I got for less than $10 or $15 total, I think, even with shipping and stuff. They're really simple ways to get better at targeting these specific fish. And then once you take them and read them, you just go out and use that information and try your best to remember them. What I've done, as you saw with the one, I have loose leaf paper in them. As I read a chapter, I take notes and I write down what I think that I need to remember. And a lot of us spend a lot of time nowadays doing everything digitally. So I just don't find that typing something into the computer after I read it is effective in imprinting it on my brain. I don't know why. Writing it down on the paper helps me remember it so much better. And then Google has a very cool tool where you have their Google Documents, Google Docs app or whatever it is. You can go in there. And what I did is I literally sat here in my podcast studio and I read the notes into Google. And then when I go out to fish, especially in a place where I'm not used to, say right here, it says how to fish from the Advanced Bass Fishing. I have it pulled up. It says flatland and highland waters. I normally fish flatland waters, yeah, I suppose. But like, say I go to a reservoir down south and I want to catch bass there, I have a primer on that, and I have a condensed version of the notes. Highland bodies of water, most commonly found in Northeast, Midwest, and Northwest. Characteristic of hilly and mountainous regions. Blah, blah, blah. All these notes, and I can do a quick control find or search option to search this area, and then I have all the pictures that I took of the maps in the books are in here, so I have a quick reference if I'm in a new place. That's been working super well for me, because obviously even these 4 books, I'm not going to remember everything. And say I'm fishing a river and I want to catch smallmouth, and I'll take a look at an aerial view of the map and I'll find an area that matches up with one of their maps, go there, throw some casts, and maybe catch a fish or two. So there's a lot of options on how to use this information. But I personally found that taking notes is the best way for me, and I can easily reference them when I'm out and about on my phone, which is something that technology is great for nowadays. So yeah, 4 books that you can use to go out, catch, target fish. Guarantee if you read these books, use the information in them, take them and put them into practice, you'll catch more fish. I don't know how you wouldn't. It's free knowledge that people have spent a lot of time figuring out and writing about and learning about for decades and decades and decades. Some of the biggest names in fishing have written these books, and they're doing all the hard work so you don't have to. So definitely recommend it. And, we got names in here: Al Linder, Fred Buller, Doug Stange, Dave Cassanda, Ron Linder, Bob Ripley, Jan Eggers. Tons of big names in fishing in here. You're going to want to use this information because they spent most of their lives learning this stuff, so you don't have to. I hope this was helpful. I know it wasn't very in-depth review of each book or anything, but that's not what it's for. It's just to give you a primer, some quick stuff. Do like the Fisherman books a lot. They're just full, dense of information. And, any of these books are going to help you out significantly. I got a ton more back behind me on the bookshelf that I got to get through. A lot of them are more specific to fly fishing and stuff too, but I'm just pouring over this information, trying giving you the best stuff so you don't have to. But I do recommend picking these books up, looking them up, reading them. So I hope you learned something today. Hope you learned something from these books. I'll be back soon with another episode. Thank you guys for listening so much. Hey, thanks for listening to the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast. If you're getting anything out of this, if you're learning something, if it's helped you in any way, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. Throw me $1, throw me $2. We greatly appreciate it. Just using it to keep this ship afloat. So thank you very much.